Hey, Andrew Ferguson here from Kensington Wine Market for another single sample session with our Berries Inchgower. I don't even remember what year this is, 2009 KWM Cask. This is one of the latest and greatest to arrive in shop. It's sherry cask. It's pretty cool. It's from a distillery we've never bottled a single cask from before, Inchgower. So that in itself is kind of noteworthy and interesting. Before we taste the whiskey, we'll talk a little bit about the whiskey distillery it came from, as well as the bottler. So starting with Inchgower. Inchgower is a Speyside distillery located on the coast of Scotland, just north and east of Elgin, near the town of Buckie. And it's a distillery we don't see very often. It's part of the Diageo group. Almost all of its production is destined for blending. Official releases have been extremely rare. We do see it from independent bottlers, but surprisingly not a lot. It's a whiskey that I've found to be a little inconsistent over the years, sometimes a bit on that like big and meaty side, almost always salty. I've had some good casks of it, but primarily they've been from sherry casks. And I think part of that has to do with the fact that it's got a short fermentation, and a lot of the things they do production-wise are all geared towards creating kind of a weightier spirit. Some people believe it's got a bit of a waxy profile, something like Clynelish, not quite as waxy, but sort of in that direction. Yeah, as I said, I've personally found that the whiskey has a very salty profile to it. And again, there's some people that believe that it's actually not that salty, it's more of a spicy element, but it manifests as a saltiness on the palate. Regardless, I mean, the distillery is right at the coast. It would make perfect sense that it would have some degree of a salty element to it. It is occasionally part of the flora and fauna range, which surprisingly you can still find at some Diageo visitor centers today. I was just over in Scotland, saw a few of those bottles, was tempted to buy some and bring them back, but I didn't. Maybe another time. So Inchgower, 1871, it was acquired by Arthur Bell, Bell's Whiskey in the 1930s. In the years ahead of that, it had been purchased basically by the town because the owner had gone bankrupt and the town wanted to save the distillery and keep people employed, which is somewhat unusual. But once it became part of Bell's, it eventually became part of the behemoth that is Diageo today. The independent baller, I've talked about this in a couple of the other videos. Berry Brothers and Rudd, the 325-year-old this year wine merchant based in London at number 3 St. James Street. They are also an independent baller of Scotch whiskey, a blender. For a long time, they actually manned and operated the Glenrothes brand, and they started and ran and eventually sold off the Cutty Sark, the famous Cutty Sark blend. We've been working with them for the better part of 20 years now. We're getting pretty close to it anyway. And we get some cool single casks from them. So why don't we dive into the Inchgower here? I've already poured mine into the glass just to let it breathe a little bit before we nose and taste it. This is distilled in 2009. On the website, I note that it says matured in Oloroso sherry. It's actually finished in Oloroso sherry. It started in somewhat ambiguously hogshead casks, but in total it matured 13 years, bottled at 54.2%. And it's changed since we first opened the bottle. And sometimes I kind of feel like I rush to write the tasting notes really quickly because we've got the whiskeys in. We want to start talking about them, get people excited about them, and you have to acknowledge that these things, once they open, they do breathe. They oxygenate. The flavors are going to change a little. And the nose on this right now is softer and more sherried than I thought. Lots of chocolate. I think I probably wrote about jujubes on this one. Brandy snaps, cherry herring liqueur, if you've ever had that. It tastes a lot better than it sounds, as long as it's mixed in something. Sticky toffee pudding. I really get that one now. Also those spice elements, that spiciness of the spirit and or the sherry cask is now starting to creep into the nose as well too. Licorice, my original tasting note on this said goodies, which is a candy I used to eat a lot. My mom loved goodies when I was a kid. And that really soft, chewy Aussie licorice too. On the fruit side of things, it's starting to go into raisins, dates, figs, a little bit of leather and tobacco. For a finish, this has got some nice balance to it. I think sometimes there's a lot of wet fill sherry finishes that give you this really goopy, sherried profile. This is not that. And I'm still getting a bit of that maritime saltiness there. So could it be that the water along the coast of Scotland just has a bit more salt in it? Or maybe during that fermentation distillation process, the spirit is pulling that character into it. I don't know. I've heard two different versions of it that conflict with each other. But as I said, my earliest memories of sampling old Inchgowers from producers like A.D. Rattray, Gordon MacPhail, and others in the mid-2000s was that I just always remembered it being typically best in sherry casks and that it had this really salty, briny profile to it. Well, let's give it a taste. Ooh. It does pack a big, spicy hit to it. I think you're getting a bit of a combination there of both the spiciness of the spirit, but spiciness from that European oak finishing, or I shouldn't say European oak, sherry oak finishing, because it doesn't specify, it just says Oloroso sherry. Whether it's American oak Oloroso sherry or European oak Oloroso sherry, regardless. We're getting like coffee tones, more licorice, still getting the goodies and that Aussie, that chewy Aussie licorice, but also going into a saltier Dutch style licorice too. Lots of chocolate, dark chocolate, milk chocolate. The jujubes are there. On the fruit side of things, more raisins, dates, figs. Kind of like prosciutto wrapped grilled dates on there too. Also some lighter, fresher ones too. You can see a bit of that vanilla toastiness from that original hogshead creeping through as well. And you know, if I wasn't confident that these guys don't typically peat their malt, I'd almost say there's like a faint hit of peat coming from this. It could just be the earthiness of the whiskey and the combination of those sherry seasoned casks, which can add that earthier, drier element to it. But there is something in there that makes me think that there's almost a faint peat edge to it. And what about the salt? I'm feeling those flavor sensors on the sides of my tongues firing, which is typically a sign of a saltiness creeping in. This is a really savory, meaty dram. It works really nicely with the sherry. The cool thing here, no flaws in this sherry. This is a really clean sherry cask whiskey, but it's dry, it's nutty, it's earthy, and it's really, really spicy. Moving into the finish, there's nice richness, it's coating. That could be a little bit of that slightly waxy profile that some of the other, sources of information talk about being in that Inchgower spirit profile style. This is drinking great. I think I'm going to have to rewrite my tasting note that's on our website because I feel like it hasn't fully done it justice. I did say in there that, I was a little nervous when this arrived because I've had such a checkered history with bottlings of Inchgower in the past, but that I should have trusted that my staff and I, who basically approve every cask we bottle, we, with very, very few exceptions, maybe one or two, never bottle a cask without sampling it first, and this would certainly be one of those. But this is growing on me, and it's even better than I thought it was when I first tried it. So I hope you're enjoying our Berries Inchgower. They are available for sale through the website, much as the tasting samples were. If you're just stumbling across this video on YouTube, we are selling both samples of the whiskey and full-size bottles at KensingtonWineMarket.com. If you probably just type in Inchgower, this should pop up pretty quickly. Regardless, until next time, Slange. Cheers.